Hello, my name is Greg. I'm the Vice President of the Democratic Party of Evanston. This is part of our ongoing video interview series with all of the municipal candidates for the upcoming election. So as you may remember, for people who've been members for a while, we used to do an endorsement event where we all got together down at the Unitarian Church. All the candidates got a couple of minutes to get up on stage and introduce themselves, and then we all voted. Obviously, we can't do that this year, so we're providing these interviews as a way for you to get to know the candidates and hear from them on some questions that you may have for them. So I'm here today with Peter Braithwaite, who is the current 2nd Ward Alderman running for re-election. Just a reminder, if you're not a member yet, you can sign up to become a member on our website, evanstondem's.com, either as a dues-paying member, or if you'd prefer to get your membership complimentary by volunteering, you can just reach out to us, and we have some events coming up for you to volunteer for and get your membership that way. So the endorsement ballots will go out on January 17th. They're due back in by 8 p.m. on January 23rd. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you just take the first few minutes, give us a couple minutes and introduce yourself.
Thank you. First, thank you very much, Greg, to you and all the members of the Democratic Party of Evanston. As you know, your building is now most recently in the 2nd Ward, so I was really happy when you moved locations. I think the proximity to the high school and the fact that it's easy to access through public transportation is just great, and can't thank you enough for the wonderful work that you've done. Just a little bit about myself. Born and raised here in Evanston, a product of District 65 and 202. Graduated from the University of Kansas. For majority of life, right after school, I've worked in social service agencies here in town, particularly I Have a Dream, working with a group of 36 students, shepherding through District 65 and the high school eventually to graduate, and then supported them while they're in college. Most people don't know that about me. And then I spent a little bit of time at the McGaw YMCA, filling Rod Joy's position when he moved to work for Jan Schakowsky for about 2 years. And since then, my professional career outside of council has always been sales, medical sales, and most recently working in the MRO space. So I enjoy what I do here in town. I've had the privilege of serving the 2nd Ward residents for the past 2 terms. And during that time, I've focused on economic development, keeping our neighborhoods safe, taking care of our most vulnerable families, and of course, affordable housing. One of the unique things, Greg, and for those that are paying attention, I take a lot of pride in saying that the 2nd Ward is the most racially and economically diverse ward. And so the assets include 2 shopping centers, a very large, robust, rich residential community, part of downtown Evanston, as well as District 65 and 202. So the footprint is pretty large, and it keeps me busy. So looking forward to your next couple of questions.
All right, thank you very much. So the first question we had, and all these questions came from our members, and quite a few of them had some version of this question.
Sure.
How well do you feel that the city of Evanston has upheld its goal to assess decisions and policies through a lens of equity?
I think, fairly well. Obviously, there's always more room to work. I'm proud that I sat on council when we hired our first equity empowerment or equity coordinator. I can't remember the exact title, but Patricia Effiam, she was with the city for some time. And then in addition to that, we also have an equity empowerment committee that works along with her. I mean, it's the big buzzword right now. And we're working really hard as a community to make sure, to push beyond the equality to making sure that people get what they actually need. And so I consider it, I have many council members who, I think Alderman Nguyen serves on our equity task force, Alderman Holmes, who I've had an opportunity to work for. So it's one of those things that I would sum up as saying it's work in progress.
All right. So our members also had quite a few questions, as you could imagine, about policing. So that's going to be
Sure.
my next topic here.
Yeah.
So as an alderman, how do you go about listening to and weighing conflicting calls from some constituents who might want more of a conventional police presence versus some constituents who are calling for less of a conventional police presence?
Sure. And that's a great question. And so clearly the police go where they're called. And there are some areas of our wonderful community that's, 4 by 7 miles where police calls are more customer service versus in the past, we've had some really serious calls. I mean, even I think it was just a week ago that we've had a shooting. And I mean, here's the reality. We live in a very violent world, coming off a very difficult 4 years of Donald Trump's administration that has, I don't want to say that it's brought up. I think the tensions have always been there, but with the president of Donald Trump, with his presence and under his presidency, it's really more clear. And so you combine within the last 4 years, a lot of protesting, civil unrest, the natural violence that you see in town. I mean, the police are deployed, those resources go where they're needed. And I think my responsibility as a council member is to make sure that not only for our residents that are in our ward, but those that are citywide, when and where you need it, that's where they should go. I've also had the privilege of working very closely with some of the Black Lives Matter students, which has been really exciting to see, particularly for our youth, that are incubated here in our town, graduates of Evanston Township, really tough, challenging questions. I mean, I have teenagers that are in school, and I think it's just really great the way that they have made their voices heard, really challenged our city council in terms of the police defunding mission, as well as other activities that they've been involved with. So I would tell you, I can start with myself. It's something that you listen to and pay very close attention to. And it's progress in working progress, excuse me.
So for those constituents who are calling for, less of a conventional police presence or defunding the police, what do you do to sort of reassure them that they're not being over policed, or that, if there is, a disparity in policing, that officers are held accountable for that?
So I want to divide that question into two categories, right? And so on the front end, I'll restate that in our town of 4 by 7, the police are called by our residents. You know what I mean? So they don't necessarily go out looking for problems. They're responding to calls for service. So they go where they're called. In terms of, and if I can paraphrase what you said, in dealing with those that are concerned about the over-policing, I take a lot of pride in the fact that in a very short period of time, students were able to mobilize a lot of adults in our community to take a very careful look at our budget. And so if you want me to give you a real example, I think we've saved somewhere between $1.3, $1.9 million out of our budget. We had a number of positions that we have left vacant. And now, under the leadership of Alderman Cicely Fleming, there was a committee that's been formed to take a deeper dive into how we respond to calls, answering the questions that the community has put forward, and then looking for alternatives to ways of addressing how we utilize our police resources, particularly when it comes to our mentally ill. And I think that that's an area and a subject that we definitely need to pay more attention to. Given the pandemic, I think it's made it more aware, made us all more aware, hopefully, the need to pay attention to those individuals who live in our community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So there was a question concerning FOIAs, especially those made of the Evanston Police Department, and it's become something of a contentious issue, I know, at City Council lately.
Mhm.
So what do you believe the city can do to promote transparency and accountability and, you know, restore the public confidence in the FOIA process?
So I guess that's going to depend on who you talk to. I think traditionally the FOIA process is pretty straightforward in terms of accessing and asking questions as it relates to, you know, how we make decisions. I know that uh, there's a number of individuals who really, you know, take advantage of that resource. I don't have a number at the top of my head. I think where we hear concern is how far you go with that, right? And I think there's some things that we can all, you know, agree to in terms of someone's name as it relates to a record of someone of a violent crime. I mean, I can't speak for the rest of the members of City Council, but I mean, all of our email is a pretty open book. And a lot of the issues that I deal with, I would say 80% of the issues that I deal with are matters of residents' concerns, service issues, employment issues. So I personally, I know exactly what you're talking about. I have to be honest, I don't see it as a really big issue. I don't think that there's anything that from our staff, the clerk, that's being hid. Although Evanston is a very hyper engaged community, there are folks with strong opinions that would disagree with me, but that's my answer.
Would you want to see those responsibilities returned to the clerk's office?
I'm not really sure when you say that, what responsibilities were removed from the clerk's office. I mean, when someone presents a FOIA request in the past, that goes directly to the department. And then depending on the nature of the request, whether it's police or whether it's something that goes to another department, I think that's all vetted through our legal department. I think where we've struggled in the past, and particularly with the clerk, there are things and information that he chooses that he believes that he should have access to. And that's really difficult for me to respond to. I would much rather, I mean, Clerk Reed has been really clear in the public in terms of what he feels are his roles and responsibilities are as it relates to FOIA. From my perspective and lens, it's pretty straightforward. You know, when you request information, departments are required to give that by state law. Information that's removed typically are those that identify an individual or protect. I would say differently. I think the important information that should be protected are the individual's names as it relates to sensitive topics, whether it's crime or other things that we have to deal with, unfortunately. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. Um,
Okay.
so the next question is concerns the police oversight board. So as you know, we have the system where the oversight board members are appointed by the mayor, approved by city council. And you know the board is a fairly new the system is fairly
Right.
new. How do you see that it's working to its intended purpose thus far? I know there are some people who are calling for it to be either made stronger or given more authority, or even you know, changing how the board members are put on that board.
And so when you say some people are asking, who are you referring to, just so I make sure that I'm clear with the question that I'm responding to?
I didn't want to present it in the question as if this is the only solution, but the organization that I believe our member is asking about was CNP, who have advocated for either an elected board or something of that nature.
Sure. I guess the best way that I can answer that question is, I mean, you should look at the names of the individuals that are on it. I mean, I think it's a pretty well diverse board of ethnicities across the city of Evanston. I'm really glad that, and I think we've had police cameras for maybe 2 years now, maybe a little bit more. I could be wrong, but fact check that. The point is we have cameras now, and the cameras hold our police officers to a different standard now, that you have not only a recording, but you actually have video. And what I've noticed over the last couple of years regarding the complaint process is that we do our best to advertise how to do it. From a city council perspective, human services, we see all those complaints that come through. And I think it's a pretty straightforward process. Residents who feel that they need any additional support, they typically reach out to their alderman. And I understand the concerns of CNP. I appreciate the fact that they're our partner in keeping a close eye on the resources and the complaints. Overall, I think the process is working very, very well. And I'm really thankful for the individuals who have stepped up to serve on that committee.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the final question I had on this subject concerns a specific event that happened just a few months ago when the city of Evanston brought in the Northern Illinois Police Alarm System officers.
NIPUS.
The protests on Halloween.
Sure.
Do you believe that the level of oversight the city has over NIPUS is sufficient? Or what would you like to do to make this relationship more transparent to Evanston residents?
I enjoy the word transparency that continues to be a theme here. I think it's pretty straightforward. A couple of weeks ago, we had a report from Chief Cook. For those of us that have worked closely with him, I would say he's homegrown. He has spent a lot of years working for our police force. He's gone away from our community for a period of time where he was a chief, and he has expanded his responsibilities and the resources. His resources extend beyond the Evanston Police Department. And here's the reality. I don't make up the rules. We rely very much on our chief of police to execute the safety of our town. And I think the reality of what I saw over those 30 days is that what started as very calm, organized student protesting over the period of 30 days escalated. And from some of the reports that I've heard, it really got violent. And that's unfortunate. I can't tell you that all the Northwestern students were involved. Reports that I've heard that we had, and I don't want to say anarchists, so I don't have a good word to label them in this interview, but people from outside of our community threatening violence and also destruction of property. And so I have protested from my years in college. I've protested the last, 3 or I think within the last like 6 months, particularly during the transition of Donald Trump. And I think it's a good thing. It's healthy, it's important. However, whether you're Black Lives Matter, whatever your protest, I don't support the vandalism of private property or commercial property, number one. And when you see the crowd, and this is just what I've actually watched a few videos. My understanding that there were, people that brought bricks into the crowd, which that has no place in protesting, particularly on a local level. We've also seen, or I've heard reports that there were laser beams that were pointed at officers, which would remind us of a pointer or something, the laser pointer, this mounted on a weapon. So I think when you get into that area, I think it's important that you have a strong presence of police to maintain the crowd. And the nice thing that you and I both know is that I think out of that whole series, there was only one arrest made. Now, what's interesting, if you would have watched the city council meeting or the human services meeting last month, or maybe the last 45 days, we had a situation where there was a resident that had a weapon and was firing at the public. Now, I won't compare that to the large protesting crowd, but again, that's a situation where we didn't call NIPUS, but we had our Evanston Police Department responding to that. So the reality is, I mean, you utilize force where you need it. I trust Chief Cook in the responsible way that he's managing it. It's always a difficult, tense situation when you have a large crowd like that. And I'm just really thankful that no one got seriously hurt, and that I believe we only had one arrest.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So the next couple of questions we got just sort of are questions about the government, the city government broadly. Is there anything about the culture of our city government that you would like to see changed?
That's a good question. I definitely think that, and this is overall, right? This is overall. The last 4 years have been very difficult.
I've heard
Under
people
Donald Trump.
interpret that question very many ways.
Yes, yes, yes. And thank you for giving me time to think about it. I think the last 4 years have been very difficult in terms of, and the topic that I'll use is civility. Evanston as a whole has always been a very hyper-engaged community, which I love. I love that about our town, that there, you know, the issues that our residents care about, whether it's environment, climate, human services, you name it. We have a lot of causes in town. It's a type of place that you can find similarities, and you can always find a group to support your cause. I think during that period of time that we've lost our way in terms of how we communicate with each other, which I think is really important. And for some, I may not agree with, you know, everything that I hear, but I still hear it and I listen. And as a city council member, you know, you don't need to swear. I just keep using the word civility, and maybe I'm being too general and base with it, but I think we definitely need to return to that way that we sit and listen to each other. The other issue that I want to address is, if I can just take a moment and really talk about transparency. I made comments last week at our city council meeting. If an individual comes to a city council meeting and with a very powerful statement, there's this general sense that if the vote doesn't go the way of the people that signed up, for some, I've received feedback that the council doesn't listen and that we lack transparency. And so when I hear that we lack transparency, I'm always asking the question that, are you reading the information that I read to make my decision, or any of my peers? And I think it's important for our residents to understand, and I hope that this serves as a platform, that it's like the Schoolhouse Rock video, you know, cartoon, that, you know, I'm just a bill. Like, where does it start? The work starts in the committee, whether it's economic development, human services, preservation, you name it. We have a ton of them, but that's really where the work starts, right? And I think it's important that I remind our residents that if there's something that you're concerned about, there are many different ways to find out about it. Many of us rely on, you know, what they read in our media. We have a number of newsletters that you can sign up to receive the pings and the announcements whenever things are happening. But where we talk about it, where we receive our staff reports, where most of the questions are asked are at that committee level. There's always something to read prior to a vote. And then really by the time it comes to city council, if you're tracking the information, then at council, it's just an opportunity to vote, not necessarily discuss everything that comes up. So I hope that that at least explains a little bit of my methodology in terms of, you know, how decisions are made. It isn't made the night of council. The work really takes place at the committee level. And I think if more residents took the time to read the information, the same information that I read, it sort of alleviates just the concern of lack of transparency. I mean, it's a long answer, but I feel really passionate about trying to get that message out, that it requires work. And you can't rely on what you hear from someone. I would much rather someone present, this is what I read, and I disagree. And unfortunately, I don't hear enough of that.
No, thank you. That answers the question.
Sure.
So we got quite a few questions about the environment, and I'm curious to hear what you think of the Climate Action Resilience Plan. You know, the goal of a carbon neutral Evanston by 2050. What do you
Yep.
feel are the biggest challenges we face in reaching that goal?
So great question. The CAR plan is something that I don't work on that on a regular basis. I get the updates just like full council. So from my perspective, I rely very closely on obviously the residents. There's Citizens for Greener Energy. There's our staff, Kumar Jensen. I have someone in the ward, his name is Hugh Bartling. That's a professor at DePaul. So in terms of the details, the benchmarks, I mean, I could regurgitate those things, but I think it's just continuing to build awareness in certain areas. I'm proud to say that I've sat on the council that when we looked at, I'm trying to remember the word, aggregating our electricity, that we adopted, we looked for the 100% renewable plan, hopefully I'm using the right terminology. We've taken steps to benchmark our businesses in terms of their electricity that they are using. With our new buildings, there are provisions to make sure that that all those considerations that are in the plan are taken into consideration. So it's something that I pay attention to. Is it my strong point? I could probably do more. And I think in terms of obstacles, it's just creating a greater awareness.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
So we had a lot of questions about the budget, and I didn't
Sure.
want these to get too, I didn't want to turn this into a budget seminar.
Yep.
So I just want to ask, how do you feel overall that expenditures of the city of Evanston over the last 4 years have appropriately reflected the priorities, needs, and interests of Evanston residents?
Ask the question again, because I can go different ways with that. Ask me again.
Sure.
Yep.
Do you feel overall that expenditures by the city of Evanston over the last 4 years have appropriately reflected the priorities, needs, and interests of Evanston residents?
Yeah, I would say to the best of our ability. I mean, coming off this last budget, we had to save somewhere between $8 to $10 million. So if I or any other member of city council was to say that, you know, our budget reflected all of the needs of our citizens, I'd be lying to you. So in this year particularly, we had to make some really difficult cuts. We also had to slightly raise taxes. So I think based on the resources that we had, we all listened to our residents and what I call a participatory budget, meaning that I have had, I think, maybe 2 meetings at my ward just to listen to the concerns of my second ward residents. So I did the best that I could in terms of advocating for the areas and issues that were priorities. Overall, I think it's important to note that our staff were furloughed during the period of the pandemic, and that may have helped us to save maybe $1.5 million, maybe $1.2 million. So the budget is a moving target. I think more importantly, what I would want to talk about is 2021 in recovery. We had an $8 to $10 million gap that we had to fill due to mainly retail tax going down, entertainment tax going down, and all the other impacts of the pandemic. So I'm excited that with next year, hopefully we will sell some assets that will allow us to recoup some money in the budget. And the other thing that I'm really going to have a hyper focus on is our local spend, meaning how do we maximize our dollars and recycle them within the community. You're going to hear me talk a lot about this, Greg. Within our budget category, we have a 20K and underspend, meaning that these are dollars that our directors from our different departments spend that are approved by our city manager. And it ranges. The functional spend is anywhere from like printing, supplies, services, it goes down, but it averages about $13 million. And out of that $13 million, we're only spending right now 1.3 million locally. And so for anyone who's been paying attention to council meetings, it's not just myself, but we're really pressing on staff. And I think this is where the work comes in, because we may have to expand our policies. That what are we doing to make sure that we're giving our local businesses an opportunity to procure services from the city of Evanston. In addition to that, I'm working very closely with our other purchasing agencies, Northwestern, District 65, 202, the hospitals in the Rotary, and there's progress being made to bring us all on the same purchasing platform, again, to give our local businesses more exposure and to maximize that collective spend. So I understand the problem, but more importantly, I hope that I'm providing a solution that residents can get behind that will help to continue to support our local businesses and grow our economy as we recover from the pandemic.
That actually sort of lines up with what my next question was. So even before the pandemic, it seemed as though downtown Evanston was full of empty storefronts. What do you believe can be done? And of course, the pandemic has just exacerbated that, made that, much worse. What do you believe can be done to promote development in a way that prioritizes small ownership, a small business and local ownership?
So I think I touched on that with the last question. Is we're going to prioritize our local spend. I mean, from a local government perspective, what does that mean? That means that we're going to work really hard to retain the businesses that are here, and that you want to attract the businesses that we don't currently have here in town. And so I think there's been a lot of support for our restaurants, which is great. We need to continue to push the vaccine. So one of the things I want to stop and say is, there's a survey that's going out right now, multiple channels, the round table, pushing it through the city of Evanston. So we're hoping to, with the president's promise to release more vaccines to our community, that as many people that have the trust and faith that it's going to work are taking advantage of that survey. So we already have our first responders that have been targeted to receive the vaccine, and that's in motion. The hospitals are taking care of their front staff. So now for our residents, there is a survey that's circulating in our community, and I hope that everybody takes advantage to fill that out, just to help, as the president says, get the vaccine in their arms. And when we do that, that's going to help to stimulate our economy. That's going to help our restaurants and other businesses to open up. And then once we get that in motion, it's just a matter of continuing to attract those businesses that are going to be supported by our community.
Thank you.
Yes,
and thanks for the reminder for that form. I filled it out.
Absolutely. If you haven't done so, to anybody that's listening now or will listen later, that's really important that you take the time to fill out that survey. That's going to help determine how much vaccine, once it's released, that our town will get.
So my next question, moving from commercial development to residential development, despite the number of new residential units constructed in Evanston over the last few years, especially in some of these larger buildings that have gone up downtown, housing costs in Evanston are continuing to rise. Do you feel
Yeah,
that the inclusionary housing ordinance is doing enough to combat this? And what other solutions would you like to see implemented?
sure. So here's the reality, and some people may see it as a problem. I think, here in the city of Evanston, I call it like the Beverly Hills of the North Shore. You can expect that property value is always going to go up. And if you're a homeowner, for many of us, that is like your primary investment is your home. So I don't think anyone who owns a home who's listening to this will raise their hand and say that I want my property value to remain the same. I think there's a natural desire, or at least I can speak for myself or anybody who owns a home, that your value is going to appreciate. And so with that being said, I think there's a certain level of education that needs to take place for people that want to remain in town. And that is, how someone spends their money is definitely their priority. But I think housing needs to be like the focus, as you said. And so if you have a choice, and this, again, I use this as an example, and I'm going to answer your question, but I just want to make it like a larger point. I can choose to rent and go on vacations and buy, a really nice fancy car, or I can own a condo. And so my point is that when I started with a younger family, and I don't have an opportunity to talk about this, we lived outside of Evanston for a period of time just because of we couldn't afford the house that we wanted. And it's something that you hear all the time. And we left our community, I went up north, rented, and then during that time, I found out that there was an opportunity, an affordable housing opportunity, actually in the 8th Ward. And this was years ago. But we made a real conscious choice at that time to make sure that we got qualified for the housing. We did the sacrifice that we needed to in order to pay for that housing. And because of that, we were able to live back in Evanston. We were able to, have equity in our property that eventually, with our income, we were able to buy a house in town. So you're never going to have enough. I don't think you're ever going to have enough property in town, Greg, to meet the demand. That's a national problem that everybody strives for, but it's difficult. And I think the important thing that we can do as a community is to change the mindset and values of folks who really want to live in town. So that's going to be an ongoing issue that I'll continue to fight and advocate for. But changing the mentality of those who really want to live in town, I think, is the greater challenge there.
Okay, thank you. So the next one, I just wanted to ask, what do you see as a specific challenge for Ward 2 that this rest of the city doesn't face?
That's a good question. I mean, I started the meeting by sharing that the 2nd Ward is the most racially and economically diverse wards. I think, with the high school, the district, our different shopping centers, we have dense residential, we have high rises in the in the downtown area. Our ward represents every single issue that you can think of. Collectively, what I focus on are priorities, keeping our neighborhood safe, just based on that diversity that I just shared with you. Focusing on families and livability, paying very close attention to those that are vulnerable, our youth, our young adults, and our seniors, making sure that I work very closely with our community partners and organizations to make sure that they get the resources that they need. Economic development is something that I also talk about, making sure that we are prioritizing those businesses that help to expand our tax base, that provide quality jobs for our residents. I already talked extensively about the local spend, and that's going to be something that I'm going to work very hard on with other members of our council. And then the piece that we touched on before it's that housing piece. and making sure that we put as much inventory that we can. Really excited that, last year I made a referral to expand our accessory dwelling units. And so you're going to hear a little bit more about that. We have a pilot program that's going on in the second ward, the area of Florence between Dempster and Lee Street, where we have large properties that have a nice footprint. If you walk along that area east or west of, I think it's Darrow or maybe Florence, you'll notice that we have a lot of farmhouses or coach houses / farmhouses in terms of garages, like really big garages with a footprint that's going to create a wonderful opportunity to create some additional accessory units. And Dick Coe, who has worked very hard around town, just raising awareness. He's looking at modular housing. He's looking at ways of streamlining that process to help our residents who want to stay in their house and take advantage of a larger footprint to create smaller, I don't want to say tiny homes, but to give you an example, to repurpose their garages that will allow them to create additional units for people to stay in that hopefully are going to be more affordable.
Okay, thank you. So one of my last questions here before I move on to the, because I've gotten a couple of questions sent to me in chat by our spectators. So
Yes.
of your time on City Council, what's one decision that you disagree with in retrospect, or what's one decision when it didn't go as you would have liked it to?
Oh gosh, too many to list. Can I come back to that question and think about that? What else do you have? And I'll try to answer. I want to think about that.
So the other one that I've been asking all of the incumbents is when you first joined City Council, what was your #1 priority? And do you consider that to have been a goal that you achieved for yourself?
I think that's ongoing. And I've been blessed, and we have had really good leadership in the second ward. When I was a little kid, it was Alderman Dennis Drummer, who really utilized our block clubs as a way of stabilizing our community and keeping us organized. That baton was then passed to Lionel Jean-Baptiste, who is now Judge Baptiste. And he continued that the same continuity, and that is keeping our neighborhood safe, focusing on our most vulnerable families, making sure that we are attracting the right businesses that are going to support our tax base and employ our town, and of course, continuing to fight for affordable housing. So when I think of change, I'm always trying to be nimble in how I address those issues, but those core values that my predecessors have, founded and exercised is the same playbook that I run. And I think it's really important to note that in terms of, the use of my time, City Council is something that, everybody pays attention to, but council meetings, ward meetings, public conversations, that's probably like about 15% of what we do. The rest of the time is spent responding to residents' needs on an individual basis. And so I think as long as I continue to do that, I'm meeting the challenges of my ward. And, I'm proud to say for the last 2 terms that our residents in the second ward have been very satisfied. And so I'm going to continue to do the same thing with my ears wide open and my heart just ready to serve.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see, moving on to the questions we had gotten from our spectators.
Sure.
And this person gave me a whole paragraph, so I'll try to.
Okay. Hopefully I can respond to it. Yeah.
It's a question about a decision from back in 2013 when you were one of the aldermen, it says, who approved the Evanston Police Department's more open use of the stop and frisk. Is that what were your reasons behind your decision then, and what are your thoughts today?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. I can't recall if that was something that we specifically voted on, but you know, I can tell you that, you know, 2013, that was a period of time that we were seeing a lot of violence in town. I can tell you that I went to far too many funerals that I cared to. I would tell you that the kids that were involved with the violence, that that there was just, and when I think about it, I get emotional. So just give me a moment to collect my thoughts. Watching people that look like me kill people who look like me was probably one of the more tragic things that anyone can deal with, right? And so when we hired our staff and created the youth and young adult program, when we looked at, you know, other programs and methods that we saw outside of our community that were effective with dealing with the violence, for someone to single out, you know, stop and frisk, that was just one tool that we used to do it. We also, we had to put up cameras in places where you didn't always have an opportunity for police. So, you know, if you want to call out stop and frisk, it was necessary at that time. It was a tool that I think Chief Eddington used. And the goal of that was to stop the violence. And that's where I'll leave it. My goal at that time was to look at every single opportunity that would stop the violence, to stop people that look like me, young adults, from killing each other.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So the next question from chat here, what have you done, or what do you plan to do to stop gentrification? And what do you plan to do to address those most vulnerable to its effects?
So I shared earlier that I think that's going to be, it's twofold. You definitely have to create more inventory that's going to provide affordable housing. And I think that there needs to be a mental shift for particularly our younger families. So if you don't have the luxury of inheritance or wealth that's being passed on, that you really need to adjust your spending in a way that you find something that you can afford and you just allow it to build equity. So there's no real easy answer. I mean, you live in Evanston, it's a choice, but understand that you're choosing to live in a town and economy that real estate is always going to appreciate, and that we as a community need to better educate ourselves on what you need to do in order to continue to stay in town. Good question, not an easy answer.
Thank you. So the last one we have out of chat here is actually a follow-up to the stop and frisk question. Sure. They wanted to know your thoughts about the long-term effects of this tactic, of this policy.
Sure.
Yeah, and they say, I think it's important to emphasize that this isn't a policy that was limited in scope.
So I'll answer the question this way. One of the things that I take a lot of pride on, and that was during last year's election, you know, we received a report in terms of the number of stops, and it was a little bit alarming in terms of the number of Black residents, particularly our youth between the ages of 18 and 26, that were being pulled over. And so it was during that examination that, you know, I was one of many folks who asked the question, well, out of those stops, how many are actually turning into arrests? And over a 3-year period, we looked at that data. We met with community partners, and similar to decriminalizing marijuana, we looked at other offenses that young adults were being stopped for, particularly that category, our young adults. And we what's the word that I'm looking for? We took a real close look at those ordinances. We worked very closely with our police department, other community members, and we changed the normal ticket that would send someone to Old Orchard or to the courts, and we're now treating them as C tickets or citations, similar to parking. So I don't know if that addresses your questions. I mean, I think the reality of all the stops that we see now, and I haven't looked at that data recently. I mean, we've created a police dashboard that makes it very clear in terms of the stops that are taking place here in town. That's something that I can, come back and answer at a later date. But I think it's important to know that the remedy to some of that, to make sure that we weren't, continuing a pathway to prison particularly for our young Black males, that we've taken measures on City Council to revisit those offenses, reduce them to a C ticket, and therefore not becoming a barrier in terms of those stops to someone's employment or the future. I hope that addresses the question, and I can always revisit that at a later point if somebody has more questions on that.
There we go. I'll have them reach out to you if they want to follow.
Sure.
We're reaching the end of our time here, so
yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to remind everybody that if you're not a member yet, you can become a member of the Democratic Party of Evanston either through our website at evanstondems.com, or if you'd like to become a member by volunteering, just reach out to us. There's a couple special elections coming up. We can get you set up to help out with them and get your membership that way. So the ballots for our endorsement will go out on the 17th of January, and they're due back by January 23rd at 8 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us, Peter.
And I just want to say thank you to you and the members of your Democratic Party of Evanston. Really good questions. I appreciate this format. If you're looking to get more information on the campaign and the issues, I would encourage you to go to our Facebook page, which is Citizens to Re-elect Peter Braithwaite. You can like our page and continue to get information about the campaign along with our website and the issues. And then I would continue, also encourage you to come to our ward meetings. I still have through March to serve, and I try to make myself available to my residents as well citywide with any questions or concerns that residents may have. So thank you again so much, Greg, to you and your organization for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts and opinions on some really good questions and issues that you brought up.